Hello, everybody. Welcome to this course on how to build your own info screen in React. It's meant to be a complete beginner course in React, which should take you from no code whatsoever until a working minor prototype for an info screen you could have on your wall or on your phone, so that you can see what's going on in the world. At the end, we'll end up with something that's very bare bones, but it'll hopefully give you some understanding in how you can create modern web applications and interact with external APIs and create something that you can keep building on. And some of these terms we'll obviously explain better later. For this first video, I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that we need to get ready. So before this course, you should have a somewhat reasonable understanding of how websites are built, and you should probably have created some websites with HTML, CSS, and maybe a little bit of JavaScript. If you haven't, that's okay. I already have a video series on this on my channel, which you can check out, which should give you a sort of introduction like this to just the basics, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. However, if you don't understand it, it could be you could follow along to these videos. They should be fairly step by step in any case, and that's fine. So let's just begin with what React is. Let's bring up some thing on the screen here. So React is a library for building user interfaces. In general, when you make normal websites, you just have JavaScript running on in your browser, supporting this interface that you create in HTML. However, in modern web development, we usually build all of that stuff in JavaScript, our coding language. So React is one developed by Facebook, which is very popular right now, and it's my favorite front end framework at the moment. However, these things change all the time. React is shown to be very durable, and it's been used over a long amount of time, so that's very useful. It means you know what you're going into. So we're going to be using React, and that's what we will be learning in this course. Second of all, we need to be familiarize ourselves with GitHub. So GitHub, for those of you that haven't been near that anymore before, is a tool or a website that that developers use to share and store their content or their the stuff they develop. So this is my profile page on GitHub, and everyone who's on it has one of these, and it shows you all of the projects that I want to show off. And repositories is what they call stores of code in GitHub. So you can click in here and you can see all the different things I'm working on. So here, Prinfo is the info screen that I have running in my apartment, which is a more advanced version of what we're doing today. And Info Skärm over here is sort of the project that we're going to be creating in this class. So for you guys' preparations, you need an account for GitHub to follow this course, which means that you need to log into GitHub. You wouldn't get this page right away. You would get some sort of login page and then register an account, and you should be fine to do that. That works just like any other registry process does. GitHub doesn't really do anything on its own. GitHub is kind of a hub for using this one technology called Git. Obviously, it's in the name. Git is an incredibly important tool for developers. It is what we call code sharing and version control system. So it's a tiny program that helps you keep track of different versions of your code. So if you've never used it before, maybe you just have the Word files that you called version 2, version 3 final, and that sort of stuff. This takes care of all of that organization, and you can just deal with your code. So it's absolutely critical, and we need it to do this task. So to download Git, you can just search for installing Git, or you can go to the website git-scm.com, and there will be some sort of download button over on the right here. So you can see I'm on a Mac. It shows me what I need. For Windows users, You'll also be asked if you want to install something called git bash. There are a few things you'll be asked if you want to install, and most of them you don't need, but you need the tool called git bash. Git bash is a terminal that's very good to use with Git, and we'll get back to what the terminal means, but that'll be a little bit different between Windows and Mac. If you're on Linux, you probably already know what a terminal is, and in any case, you have one installed. It should also be said that if you're on Mac or Linux, you probably already have Git installed, so then you don't need to worry about this. Now, let's see. The next thing on my list is Node. So Node is a very important tool that we'll be using a lot, but we might not notice it that much. So when you are writing your normal websites without React and that sort of thing, you that are using JavaScript, you still need JavaScript to run somewhere. So any programming language needs to run on something. And in JavaScript's case, the reason why it's so incredibly popular and so versatile is that it can run in your browser. So right now we're looking at my Google Chrome browser window, of course. And Google Chrome has a built-in JavaScript engine, which means it can read the JavaScript code and it can execute the commands that are written in the JavaScript code. For something like React, we want to be able to run the web app without the browser. Obviously, we're going to be looking at our website in the browser, but we might need to run some other sort of functions and some other things that we can't get just from your browser. And one of those ways we can get that is through Node. And maybe the most important reason why we use Node is Node also gives us access to something called NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. And NPM is the way where the way we get access to all these other different kinds of libraries that other people have built. And just like React is one of these JavaScript libraries. So if you don't know this, a JavaScript library is simply a bunch of JavaScript code that someone already wrote to do something complicated, or it could be something simple, of course, as well. But when you're trying to build complex websites and modern web applications, you don't really create all the code on your own. You lean on what others have done before. And Node and NPM is the easiest way of getting started with that, and it's the one we'll use. So you also need to download NPM and Node, NPM comes with Node. So what you do then is you go to their website, nodejs.org, and then you click one of these download buttons. I usually recommend picking the one that's called LTS, that stands for long-term support. The current version over here can have some bugs and that sort of thing, but both of them are probably safe. Those are two important tools, and you get NPM automatically when you download and install this thing, of course. And it should just be click and download and follow whatever wizard they have for your operating system. Okay, the next tool that I've written that we need to look at, I didn't actually open their web page, but I guess I could do that, is VS Code. VS Code is an editor, a code editor. You might use another editor, and that's totally fine. You can use whichever editor you want, but I'm recommending to use VS Code. It's the one I use every single day when I work with code, and it's very, very versatile. So if you want to have the same experience that I have when in my coding environment, you should download Visual Studio Code. But this will work with any editor that is built for coding. But let's take a quick look at how VS Code looks. So installing it would be going to code.visualstudio.com. Make sure you download Visual Studio Code and not the other tool called Visual Studio. Visual Studio is a much larger program which does sort of the same thing, but it has a lot more bloat and it's more of a sort of enterprise software. So when you download and install that, you'll have VS Code, and you can start that however you start. Oh, I didn't start VS Code at all. I'm gonna just do some code magic and start it the way I usually do. But start VS Code however you usually start a program in your operating system. So this is Visual Studio Code. It's an editor that you can use to edit code, basically. Let's find a project that I've been working on. So here's the typical reasons. You should be familiar with this sort of stuff from other things. let's take a look at Resume, for example. Resume is the project where I built my CV or my resume that I have online. And this is pretty much how it looks. We'll not look into this code, but this is JavaScript, this is React code. It's sort of similar to what we'll be building today, but it's a lot more complicated because I spent a lot of time on this tool. When you have VS Code installed, I also recommend that you get a plugin. And the plugins in VS Code you can get on the left here. I think it's this button. Yeah, they're called extensions, sorry. And you should search for a plugin called Prettier. If you click here, you'll get Prettier Code Formatter. And you can see I already have it installed, but there will be a little install button here. And you can click that, and you might need to restart VS Code afterwards. Prettier is what we call a code formatter. So a code formatter basically rewrites your code to be a consistent style. And consistent style is very important for a lot of reasons. But one of the most important reasons is it's a lot easier to notice your own mistakes when you see them. For example, Prettier won't rewrite your code if it's not valid for some reason. So then you can get a kind of a hint. And the other reason is it makes it a lot easier to cooperate with people because you'll be looking at code that looks somewhat similar. And if you're getting help from someone, then they will be more familiar in your code right away. So Prettier, I highly recommend. If you're using another editor, they might have a Prettier plugin somewhere as well. And if not, you don't need Prettier. It's just super nice. Last thing we're gonna set up in VS Code before we leave it is a setting that works with Prettier. And there's tons of settings that you can play around with, but you need to get into settings. In Mac, it's this code preferences settings. For Windows, I think it's under file, but you'll probably find that on your own. And we click the settings button and we get into this settings thing. And what we want is we want format on save. So I'm just going to click format and then, or search for format. And we find a bunch of settings that call format. And this is the one we want. We want to have checked this button that says format on save. This simply means that when you save your file, Prettier does its job and it formats your code. And that's it. That's all we need. And that should be all we need to set up before we start this course. So join me in the next episode where we start initializing the project and get started looking at some of React's structure.